Hello and welcome to Context. I'm Dilek Tuna. Today we turn to Rome, where the world's gaze has settled on the Vatican. The death of Pope Francis, the first Latin American pontiff and a reformist voice in a centuries-old institution, has left not just a spiritual void, but a strategic one too. As the bells toll and morning masses gather, a more discreet process has begun behind closed doors. The deliberations over who will next wear the white cassock. The question is more than symbolic. The next pope must shepherd a global flock across vastly different cultural and political contexts, while contending with a church grappling with internal division, dwindling numbers in Europe, and growing influence across the global south. So who are the leading contenders, and what kind of pontificate will follow? To help us unpack the forces at play behind this papal succession, we're joined by Felipe Aviles, a religious affairs expert in Lisbon who has closely tracked church appointments and internal Vatican politics. Father Peter Stilwell joins us, a Catholic priest based in Lisbon, offering insight from inside the church's spiritual leadership. And last but not least, Imam Marwan Gil, head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Argentina, joining us for a comparative interfaith perspective on global religious leadership. A warm welcome to you all. I want to start with my first question for Mr. Aviles. Now, how does the College of Cardinals balance tradition with changing demographics when choosing a new pope?
Well, part of that work, I suppose, has been done for them by the former Pope, who made a series of nominations of cardinals from around the world, the like of which had never been seen in previous pontificates. So there are more cardinals from the peripheries, as Pope Francis liked to call them, from the global south, from Africa, from Asia, from countries that have never been represented in the College of Cardinals than there have ever been before. Now, what that means exactly in terms of the choice of the next pope is an open question, because it's something of a paradox that many of these cardinals come from places that are known to be theologically and morally more conservative than most churches in the West and in Europe and in the Americas, for example. So we have more cardinals from a variety of different countries, from countries which would normally perhaps not have felt as represented in the College of Cardinals. But whether that will lead to a pope who will be more in line with Pope Francis or perhaps more theologically conservative remains to be seen. And that could be one of the big paradoxes of Pope Francis's papacy, that he may have actually opened a path to a succession which is, I won't say a point of rupture. I don't believe there is a point of rupture. The church doesn't like to function in terms of rupture, but that could take a slightly different track from what we've been used to over the past 12 years.
Okay. Now, Father Stilwell, what does this moment mean spiritually for the church and for you personally as a priest?
For me, it will be the 8th Pope, I think. And what does it mean spiritually? It means that we become aware that we are a global church, because when we start thinking of these issues of Pope Francis's leadership and who will be able to follow on, we become aware that, as Philippe was saying, the church is present in many different countries with very many different cultural backgrounds. And so the leader will have to be not just the person that we sympathize best with if we had a vote, but the person who would be able to listen to all and to give leadership not only to the church, but as Pope Francis showed, beyond the church to the world, because the Catholic Church is one of the largest religious organizations in the world, and so it has a leadership duty amongst religions.
Okay, and Imam Marwan, how does the passing of a pope impact interfaith relations, particularly with the Muslim world?
I would define the Pope Francis as a very close friend of the Muslim world. And when I say that his nearness and friendship towards the Muslims, I would say it was supported by his very powerful and symbolic gestures, actions, and his attitude. Let's remember that he was the first pope who visited Muslim countries such as Iraq, such as Bahrain. Even one of his last journeys were to Indonesia, one of the largest Muslim countries in the world. Then he had a very significant and historic meeting with the Imam of Cairo, which even after was adopted and changed into the World's Day for Fraternity, and is celebrated every year by the United Nations on the 4th of February. Then also he was the first pope who officially received a delegation of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in the Vatican, which I represent here in Argentina, and I received us at 3 occasions with such a kindness and open-heartedness. And as Peter Stilwell was telling and reminding us that the church or the Pope goes beyond the doors of the Catholic Church, that's what I saw in Pope Francis, that he didn't limit himself to the needs of the Catholic Church, rather he opened up his heart, his brain, his positions, his ideas towards global challenges and global needs. Especially if you remember during the last 2 years, his efforts to promote peace, to stop wars. I think it's not casual or coincidence that in his last mass or public appearance, once again, he called for the ceasefire regardless of all wars, but specifically the war in Gaza. So I think this is what I or how I would define Pope Francis' legacy.
Okay. And Mr. Avilés, now are there any frontrunners emerging already, and what makes them stand out?
Well, carrying on from my previous comment on the variety within the conclave, as we know, the conclave only has the cardinals who are under 80 at the time of the Pope's death, so that narrows it down. There are over 200 cardinals. There will be only 133 present in the conclave. 2 of those who are of voting age have said they probably will not be able to make it just for health reasons. But the fact that there are so many cardinals from a wide range of different countries means that there are many more cardinals who probably don't know each other very well, and who also don't know the system. They don't know Rome as well as those who live and work in the Roman Curia. And so I would say that probably there is an advantage, if we want to use these terms of advantages as if it was a political game, which of course it's not, but in order to better understand, there is perhaps an advantage for those who are, so to speak, playing at home. The cardinals who work in Rome, who know Rome, and who are better known by all the cardinals from around the world, because they are in Rome. Whenever they visit, they are there. They're the ones who most frequently appear next to the Pope. Amongst those, there are several to keep one's eye on. Of course, it's always uncertain. I would remind you that none of the pundits managed to guess who would be Pope in the previous conclave. Pope Francis was a surprise for everyone. And so there's always an element of uncertainty. But there are certain names that are unavoidable to speak about. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who is the Secretary of State, is not only very close to the Pope, he's one of the few cardinals who remained close to the Pope uninterruptedly practically since the beginning of the pontificate, because Pope Francis liked to move his cardinals around from time to time to keep them from getting too comfortable in their posts, so to speak. And Cardinal Pietro Parolin he's 70 years old, so he's not too young, he's not too old. He has, perhaps most importantly, a vast diplomatic experience and knowledge. And that could be very important in the times to come, because the next Pope will have to deal with some very difficult issues on the global stage, conflicts, threats of new conflicts, reestablishing relations that Pope Francis that under Pope Francis were strained, for example, with the United States, with Hungary, even with his native Argentina, but also with China, with Russia, and all of that could call for the experience of a diplomat. There are others, also Cardinal Filoni, who is also has a great deal of diplomatic experience. They're both Italian, which means that we could see a return of the pontificate to Italy. Then there are a couple of cardinals who are perhaps a little bit under the radar, but I think are also worth bearing in mind. There's one who definitely comes to mind, who very much embodies the spirit of Pope Francis's desire to be amongst the most poor, the most needy, and to go to great lengths to do so. And that's Cardinal Konrad Krajewski, who is from Poland, and he's the Pope's almoner. That means the person in charge of distributing the Pope's charitable contributions. And that has led him to many situations. He was very, very close to the homeless in Rome. He helped raise their status and protect their dignity. He famously at one point went to a poor neighborhood on the outskirts of Rome where the power had been cut off, and this affected thousands of poor families. And he actually broke the law by turning the power back on himself and said that he would cover expenses he would cover the next bills. And at one point also, although this wasn't spoken about very much at the time because he never sought publicity, he moved out of his own apartment so that a Syrian refugee family that had just had a baby could stay in his apartment, and he slept in an office in the building where he works. So I think if the cardinals are looking for someone who has a very strong spirit and is very much in line with Pope Francis, although perhaps less outspoken, less prone to speaking just from the cuff, as we say, then Cardinal Krajewski could be a possibility. But of course, these are just educated guesses, no more than that. And the atmosphere of a conclave, which is an atmosphere also of great prayer, of reflection, will, I'm sure, lead the cardinals to make what they hope is the best choice for someone to lead the church in the years ahead.
Okay. Mr. Aviles, we know that the voting cardinals are not to be any older than 80. Is there a limit for the new pope that's going to be voted for in terms of age?
No, there is no limit in terms of age. They could choose a cardinal from outside of the voting cardinals. There are a couple who have been named as papabile, as possible front runners. I think it would be rather unlikely. But in fact, since you asked, the actual rules, the actual limits for who can be chosen to be pope are very, very small. Basically, any Catholic man could be elected pope. Okay. Even a layman could be elected pope. He would then have to be ordained first to the diaconate, then to the priesthood, then as a bishop, and only then would he be made pope. But it could happen. It's of course very rare. It's not going to happen. But the rules are, the limits are actually very, very small on who could be named pope. So it could be someone from outside the voting cardinals, although that is unlikely. Even choosing a cardinal close to 80 would already probably be pushing the limits, because it would probably mean a rather short pontificate, and so maybe someone in their mid-70s would probably be a safer bet. Okay, Father Peter, how does the conclave process work, and how much of it is genuinely guided by divine inspiration versus politics?
The cardinals have a first discussion amongst themselves, which will be open, so to speak. It will be outside. It will be also with the cardinals who will not have a vote later on. So I think it goes on for about a week, that they meet and they discuss what are the big issues for the church and for the world. And then those who have a vote are locked in. That's where the word conclave comes in, locked into the meeting. Nowadays, it is not so locked in as it was in the past. They are locked into the Sistine Chapel when they are doing the actual voting, but then they go to the residence of Santa Marta for their meals and to sleep. They are not meant to meet with anyone else. They are meant to hand in their mobile phone, so there would be no contact with anyone outside, so there is no outside influence and no information passed from inside to out. Also, they take an oath that they will not divulge the results of what is going on, so that we will supposedly never know objectively what the votes were on each round of voting. For that reason, also, all the papers connected to each of the votes are collected and burnt. And that is the reason for the black smoke and eventually the white smoke, which will announce the election of a new pope. So that is generally how it works. There has to be a 2/3 majority. Is it 2/3 plus 1? I'm not quite sure, but it's 2/3 certainly for the first rounds. And then when it gets very extended, the conclave has new rules, which I'm afraid I'm not familiar with.
Okay, Imam Marwan, what has Pope Francis meant to Muslim communities globally, especially through his outreach efforts?
I think he was a peacemaker, a peace promoter, and especially I think I would highlight that his way of leadership was very much appreciated. Even when I arrived to Argentina, I recall how many even non-Catholics, as Argentinians, they felt so proud of him, as they felt identified with him, that despite being the head of one of the most prestigious and oldest religious institutions with millions and millions of followers worldwide, he still maintained a very simple lifestyle and was very close to the common people. And not only the common people, he was always as well connected and very much worried about the needs and the challenges of those who are what we call it in Spanish, or he used the term periferias, which means which are on the borders, on the corners, many times discriminated, forgotten by the society, poor people, persecuted people, people inflicted and victims of war and any other forms of persecution. And I think that's something which we from the Muslim world also, we never will forget and will always be appreciated, and especially then his efforts for global challenges. Let's see his Laudato Si, his message in regards of climate change, then his efforts to resolve the issues in terms of migrant disequality, poorness, poverty, his commitment during the COVID pandemic, and in this we can continue a long list. But I think for me, how I would define Pope Francis is that with very simple but powerful gestures and symbolic attitudes, he was a figure who would address the needs of global challenges and global conflicts.
Okay. Mr. Avilés, how influential are regional blocs like African or Latin American cardinals in shaping the vote?
That could be an interesting factor. I know that, for example, there's a temptation to divide the blocks, them into linguistic blocks, for example. That's also something that makes some sense, because, of course, cardinals will tend to gravitate towards those who they can better understand. And so a Nigerian cardinal may not feel as close to another African cardinal who is from a francophone country, but may feel closer and spend more time with the cardinal who also speaks English like he does. However, one has to be careful not to go too far in that sense, because, of course, just thinking of the English-speaking world, for example, there are, of course, many cardinals from the English-speaking world. There are cardinals from the United Kingdom. There are cardinals from English-speaking Africa, and, of course, from America, the Americas, rather, the United States and Canada. But there are many divisions within those countries. So there are cardinals who are more theologically progressive or theologically conservative, and they will not feel as if they belong to one bloc. The same would go for Italian-speaking cardinals, who of course also form a very important bloc. They're the largest country represented in the conclave, and also I would say for Spanish-speaking cardinals, South America, and then of course Spain, and also French-speaking cardinals. Here, and speaking from Lisbon, there could be an interesting phenomenon here with the Portuguese-speaking cardinals, because they are one of the biggest blocs, perhaps the fourth or fifth biggest bloc in the conclave, because of course there's a big contingent from Brazil, 7 cardinals, I believe, from Brazil, 4 from Portugal itself, which is the most Portugal has ever had in a conclave, and then 1 from East Timor and 1 from the islands of Cape Verde. And these are, especially the African Portuguese-speaking countries in Portugal, very, very close churches. The cardinals are generally quite well aligned amongst themselves. And there is one cardinal from Portugal who is considered by some to be a possibility for next pope. I think he's too young. He is currently the equivalent to the Minister for Education and Culture in the Vatican, Cardinal Tolentino Mendonça, who is also very well liked and respected in Brazil, and so who could build a bridge between the European and African Portuguese-speaking cardinals in Brazil. And so that could turn into quite an influential voting bloc as well. And in terms of, for example, all of the cardinals from Asia and Africa grouping together and supporting one candidate, I think it's perhaps unlikely, because even though they all come from the developing world, as we would say, that doesn't mean that they are all perfectly aligned. And above all, it doesn't mean that they know each other. Although, of course, these meetings that Father Peter Stilwell was speaking about, the general congregations where all the cardinals meet before the actual conclave begins, are a very important testing ground where the cardinals get to know each other, they learn about their different priorities, their visions for the church, and that is very much where some figures may begin to emerge. I know when Pope John Paul II died, he, of course, Benedict XVI, Joseph Ratzinger, who would later become Benedict XVI, was already someone who was very much in the public eye, because he was Pope John Paul II's right-hand man in the Vatican. But it was his speeches in the general congregation, from what we have gathered afterwards, that really convinced the cardinals that he would be the man to vote for in the conclave, and that made it a very short conclave. So a lot could happen in the general congregation. Someone could make an appearance and cause an impression and really sway the public opinion, and so that makes it life difficult for us journalists and pundits who are trying to read the signs, because we're not there and we're not open to seeing exactly what's going on in those general congregations, which of course have a very big weight.
Okay, all right. Now, Father Peter, what qualities do you believe the Church needs most in its next leader?
Well, we need to be aware that when popes move to, when they are elected and they move from their original diocese to Rome, there is a change in the context. They are looking at the world. That was something that impressed me a great deal when I was studying in Rome, was to understand that from point of view of the Catholic Church in Rome, the world is its parish, so to speak. Every day there are bishops coming from each part of the world. Every day there are students who are studying there who have come from different parts of the world. And so someone who comes from a diocese somewhere outside Rome and has been carrying out his normal pastoral duties as a bishop will suddenly become aware that he is in charge of, and he has to listen to, people who have issues and cultural sensitivities which are very different to one another. And he is, so to speak, a mediator between all these different sensibilities. And so whatever your origin or whatever your temperament, you will be partly molded by the function that you are carrying out, which is to be the Pope of the Catholic Church, which is spread across 100 and something nations. And it's also a reason why countries which have very little contact with the Catholic Church are keen to have an ambassador in the Holy See, because at the Holy See they can listen to things happening in the world. We must remember the Holy See is listening to the world down to parish level at sort of all over the world. And so there is a perception of what is happening in the world which is very rare to find elsewhere. That all of that has to be taken into account. It's not just the person, it is the context.
Okay. And Imam Marwan, from your perspective, what kind of leadership should the next Pope embody to foster better religious coexistence?
Yes, so I was saying I really hope that the new Pope would continue with the legacy of Pope Francis, especially in terms of the dialogue and the nearness towards other faiths. I think if we look nowadays at the international politics, we see more and more voices who probably propose or suggest to return to the classical way of addressing conflicts, which means putting in obstacles, distances, even some again a division between West and East, or the famous Cold Wars, right? And the Pope was a person also, what he very well explained in Fratelli Tutti, his book, All Brothers, that differences, ideological, political, theological differences, should not be an excuse of distancing or from getting away from each another. Rather, it means that we should come all together to the table. Many times he explained, especially in regards of the armed conflicts and the wars, that every war is a defeat for human dignity. And let's stop the voice or the noise of arms, but rather speak. And I really hope that we find a Pope and continue with this manner of leadership, and especially his nearness towards non-Catholics. And in this regards, I remember, I think that's very important for me to highlight the difference. For example, with Pope Benedict, after his certain remarks about Islam in Regensburg, it had caused many drifts and tensions within the Islamic world and the Catholic communities. And we see a very clear opposite change of the legacy or the time of Pope Francis, that he had managed to replace many of those walls and distances by new bridges, and had bridged and connect very well with the Muslim world. So I really hope that we have a Pope who can continue with this vision and this mission.
Indeed. Okay, Mr. Philippe Aviles, Father Peter Stilwell and Imam Marwan Gill, a very big thank you to you all for joining us on the program today. And that's all from us on Context for today. As the Vatican prepares for one of its most consequential decisions in a generation, the world awaits not just for a name, but for a vision. Will it be continuity or change, reform or restoration? One thing's clear, the choice of the next Pope will echo far beyond St. Peter's Square. I'm Dilek Tuna. Thank you for joining us.